looked beautiful in that old sweatshirt. And I laughed. But I didn't forget. I should have stopped then. Should have pulled away. But I didn't, because for the first time in years, someone saw me. Not as someone's wife. Not as the one who kept everything together. But as a woman. And I couldn't let that go. If you believe the truth isn't always black and white, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. Some stories aren't told to be judged. They're told to be understood. And this one, it's only just beginning. I've always been the dependable one. The woman who keeps things steady, smiles politely, listens more than she speaks. The one who never makes a scene, never asks for too much. I wore that role so well. People stopped checking if I was okay. Married for over 10 years. No children. My husband, practical, disciplined, always busy. We used to talk about building a family. Then it became something we stopped bringing up. Then it became something we stopped feeling. He travels often, work, always work. And when he's home, he's present the way a painting is on a wall there, but untouched. Polite, predictable, but cold in all the ways that matter. The house is nice, quiet, clean, but empty in places that aren't visible. There are nights it feels like a museum, everything in place, but nothing alive. Then Liam showed up. My nephew. 19. Tall, soft-spoken. The kind of boy who always seemed a little older than his years. He'd gotten into it with his mom, my sister. Something about boundaries, pressure, needing space. I didn't ask for details. I just told him to come. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted. Not just tired, but worn, like someone who'd been trying too hard for too long. He smiled, shy, but warm. And for a moment, it felt like the air in the house shifted. I gave him the guest room. Made dinner. Tried to make it all feel normal. He thanked me every time I poured his tea. Picked up after himself without being asked. And when I sat beside him on the couch that first night, just to keep him company, he didn't pull away like most teenage boys would. He stayed. Quiet. Still. Like he didn't mind the silence. Liam had always been sensitive, even when he was little. He'd draw for hours. Watch people more than he spoke. Ask questions adults never expected to hear from a child. And now, as a young man, that sensitivity hadn't faded. It had deepened. He looked at me in a way that felt different. Not inappropriate. Just focused. Present. Curious. I caught it once. While I was talking about something mundane, like the weather, he was staring, not just listening, but watching, like he was trying to read between my words. Back then, I told myself it was admiration, that he looked up to me. But sometimes, the way he looked at me made me forget who I was supposed to be. And I'll be honest, being seen like that, after being invisible for so long, it did something to me. It started with a simple question. We were in the kitchen, me chopping vegetables, him scrolling through his phone. He looked up and said, "Would you ever let me photograph you?" I blinked. Me? I laughed, thinking he was joking. But he didn't smile. He just nodded. I need a subject. Someone real. Someone who doesn't pretend. I told him to ask one of his college friends. Someone younger. Prettier. Someone who hadn't been worn thin by years of being overlooked. But he just kept watching me. And he said, "No one sees what I see." I didn't know what to say to that. That night, he left his camera on the coffee table, like an open invitation. And the next morning, after breakfast, I picked it up. Held it to my eye. Looked through the lens. It felt strange, but not in a bad way. A few days later, I agreed. Just one session, I told him. In the living room. Nothing fancy. He nodded. But I could see it in his face. He was already somewhere deeper than I was ready to go. We started in the late afternoon. The light was soft, golden, slipping through the curtains like a whisper. I sat by the window. Wore a sweater I hadn't touched in years. It used to be my favorite before I stopped caring how I looked in it. He didn't say much. Just gave little directions. Turn your head slightly. Look down, but not sad. Now, look at me. And I did. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. His eyes didn't flinch. His hands moved carefully, and the camera clicked like a soft heartbeat between us. I laughed at one point. Nervous, a little embarrassed. Said, "You must be running out of film." He smiled. "Good light waits for no one," he said. "Besides, you have the kind of face people write poems about." I froze. Not because it was flirtation, but because it was so tender, so effortlessly kind. I hadn't heard words like that in years. Not the scripted compliments husbands toss out on anniversaries, but something true. Something that saw me. And for the rest of the shoot, I didn't look away from the lens. Because for the first time, I wanted to be seen. It wasn't loud. What happened next? There was no music. No touch. Just air between us, dense, humming, charged. He lowered the camera. And he looked at me. Not like someone who'd just taken a photo, but like someone who'd just found something. And in that moment, I wasn't just a woman sitting by a window. I was the art. I replayed that moment in my head more times than I care to admit. The way he looked at me. It wasn't lust. It wasn't confusion. It was something else. Something deeper. Like he was trying to memorize me. After that day, something shifted. In him. In me. In the space between us. I started paying more attention to the way I looked in the mornings. Not because I wanted to seduce anyone, but because I didn't want to disappear again. I wore my hair down more often. Dusted blush onto cheeks that hadn't blushed for anything in years. Pulled out old sweaters I used to love, the ones that hugged me just right. He noticed, and I noticed that. He started lingering, too. Not in an obvious way, but I could feel it. The way he waited by the door when I was on the phone, or how he hovered in the kitchen, drying a dish that didn't need drying just to be close. I told myself it was nothing. He was young, grateful, affectionate in the way some people are when they finally feel safe. That's all it was. That's what I told myself. But at night, when I lay in bed next to a husband who fell asleep with his back to me, I found myself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Liam had said my name that morning. Soft, careful, like it meant something, and the guilt, it came quietly. It didn't shout. It whispered. It clung to me in the moments in between, when the dishwasher hummed, when the house was too quiet, when my husband kissed my forehead like a task to complete. I started rereading Liam's texts. Most of them harmless. A photo from his class. A meme. A joke. But I kept going back, smiling when his name lit up my screen, heart beating a little faster when I heard his footsteps in the hall. I told myself it was harmless, that he just reminded me what it felt like to be appreciated, to be seen. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Was I? Then came the night I couldn't forget. I was cleaning up after dinner. He was in the kitchen with me, drying the glasses. We weren't talking, just existing. And then, out of nowhere, he said, "You smell different tonight." I looked at him, confused. He smiled. Gentle, almost shy, like jasmine and something warm. "Your perfume makes the whole house feel like spring." I dropped the dish towel, laughed it off, but my hands shook. Because it wasn't what he said. It was the way he said it. Like he didn't just notice, he felt it. A week passed. Maybe more. I stopped keeping track. I'd gotten used to him being there. To the quiet comfort of his footsteps down the hall. To his voice in the evening. To the stillness between us that somehow felt full. Then one afternoon, he asked if we could do another shoot. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, camera hanging from his neck, and said, "The lighting in your bedroom's perfect around 5. The way the sun hits the mirror, it's beautiful." I paused. Everything in me paused. I should have said no, but I didn't. I told myself it was just photography, just art, just a bedroom. But even as I led him up the stairs, I knew this wasn't about light. It was about closeness. He didn't direct me much this time. Just let me sit on the edge of the bed, barefoot, sweater slipping slightly off one shoulder. He said he liked that it looked honest. I laughed. But it wasn't nerves this time. It was surrender. We didn't speak much during the shoot. Just glances. Small moments. Afterward, we sat by the window, drinking tea. I don't even remember who started the conversation. But suddenly we were talking about everything. His childhood. My marriage. The feeling of being invisible in your own home. The ache of wanting to be enough for someone, and never quite getting there. He told me his heart had been broken last year. Said he'd trusted someone who only saw him when it was convenient. I told him I understood. More than he realized. He looked at me for a long time, then said, "You're the only one who doesn't talk down to me. You actually listen." I looked away. Because if I didn't, I knew he'd see everything I was trying to hide. That night, after dinner, we stayed on the couch long after the credits rolled. It was dark, the kind of quiet where every breath feels louder. I reached for the blanket at the same time he did. Our hands touched, and neither of us pulled away. It was small. A flicker. But it felt like a spark in a room full of dry leaves. Our conversations started to stretch later into the night. We talked about dreams, regret, loneliness. The kind of things you only say when the lights are low and the rest of the world is sleeping. He wasn't just my nephew anymore. He was the first person in years who asked, "How are you really?" and stayed long enough to hear the answer. There was one night. He came to the door of my room. Not late, but just before dusk. He didn't say much at first. Just leaned against the frame. Then he asked if I believed in soul connections. I told him I wasn't sure anymore. He nodded slowly, then said, "Sometimes, I think people meet in the wrong chapters. But that doesn't make it any less real." And then, the night before my husband was due back from his business trip, Liam stayed in the kitchen after dinner. The dishes were already done. There was no reason for him to still be there. I was wiping the counter, trying not to look at him too long, trying not to feel too much. But then he said quietly, carefully, "Auntie, can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone." I stopped. He was standing just a few feet from me, but it felt like the air between us had vanished. I looked at him, and he looked right into me. No flinch, no hesitation. "It's you," he said. "It's always been you." I didn't answer him right away. I couldn't. The words he said, "It's always been you," they hit something in me I didn't know was still alive. I stared at him, my hands still damp from the dishcloth. My breath shallow. My mind scrambling for something safe to say, something adult, something appropriate. But nothing came. Only silence. And in that silence, he stepped closer. Not quickly. Not boldly. Just closer. Like he was giving me every chance to stop him. But I didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The kitchen felt too small. The lights too dim. The air too heavy. He reached out and touched my hand. His fingers were warm, gentle, barely there, but enough to make me feel like I was breaking open. I didn't pull away. I didn't lean in either. We just stood there, still, on the edge of something we couldn't name. It wasn't passion. It wasn't lust. It was the overwhelming ache of being seen and not being able to unsee. The kind of moment that doesn't scream, doesn't rush. It just holds you, right there, in the possibility of what could happen if neither of you walks away. He looked at me like he was waiting. For permission. For clarity. For anything. And I wanted to say something wise. Something final. But my voice shook when it finally came out. I whispered, "You need to go." But it didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a question. Like a plea I wasn't sure I meant. He looked at me for a long moment. And then, he turned. Walked out of the kitchen. Out of the house. And he didn't look back. The next morning, the house felt different. Not louder. Not messier. Just heavier. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It pressed against the walls like something alive. like something waiting to be acknowledged. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps that never came back down the hall. Half of me hoping he'd knock on my door, the other half praying he wouldn't. When I came downstairs, he was already in the kitchen, backpack by his feet, avoiding my eyes. He didn't say much, just that he'd called his mom, said things had cooled off back home, and he thought it was time. Time. Like it was a decision made in the light, when we both knew it had been made in the dark. I nodded. Didn't ask questions. Didn't push. There was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. Nothing I could offer that wouldn't be misunderstood. Or worse, understood perfectly. He didn't touch his coffee. And when I reached for a cup of my own, our fingers almost brushed. We both flinched. It was like that moment in the kitchen the night before had burned a boundary into the air. And now neither of us knew how to breathe around it. He didn't hug me goodbye. He just said, "Thanks for everything," and closed the door behind him. And that was it. My husband came home that evening, suitcase in one hand, phone in the other. He walked in like nothing had changed, kissed my cheek out of habit, asked what I'd made for dinner. Didn't notice the way my hands trembled. Didn't notice the way the house held its breath. He talked about his meetings, the airport delays, a new project. And I nodded at all the right places, laughed when I was supposed to, pretended. Because that's what I've always done best. But I had changed. Something in me had cracked open and I couldn't patch it back with silence. I was different now. And he didn't even notice. That night, after the dishes were done and he'd gone to bed early, like he always did, I stood in the guest room. The bed still made. No trace of Liam left. But I could feel him there. In the way the air hung heavy. In the way the shadows lingered longer than they should have. It felt like grief. But no one had died. Sometimes I still walk past the guest room. I don't go in. I just stop in the doorway and let the silence remind me of what used to live there. Not a person. A feeling. A version of myself I hadn't met in years. There are days I ask myself the same question over and over again. Was I grooming him? Or was he just the only one who saw me as more than a shadow? It's a question that doesn't come with an answer. Just shame wrapped in memory. I think about his eyes. The way they softened when he listened. The way they held me when the world forgot I was worth looking at. I remember how he said my name. Not as aunt, not as ma'am, not as someone older and distant. But like I was a person. Whole. Unhidden. And I remember my own heartbeat. How loud it got in the quiet. How fast it ran toward something I knew I shouldn't want. I didn't love him. I know that. It wasn't love. But I loved how he made me feel. Seen.